Hey guys, so with this topic of celibacy, what I want to do is just speak to anyone who's ever had the thought, celibacy, that's interesting, but I don't think I could ever actually do that. You know, it seems like kind of a big deal, kind of a big sacrifice. And well, this is actually how I used to feel. I didn't think I'd ever go near it. In fact, about 5 or 6 years ago, I couldn't really even imagine a version of me practicing celibacy. Right? I was very closed off to it, very attached to sex and relationships. And honestly, even if I tried, I just couldn't see myself or my approach to sex being in any other way than how it was. Which is precisely, by the way, why this is so interesting. Because now things are completely different. Now things have flipped 180. And I want to share with you guys a little bit about how this was possible and also what changed my perspective. So to begin with, what I noticed is that when we first talk about this idea of celibacy, our lower self, our ego, it can feel a little bit defensive. It can feel a little bit skeptical, thinking, wait a second, they're not actually suggesting we give up sex, right? That's a natural thing. That's something that everyone does. And it's not unusual here for us to react very cynically to this idea of celibacy, you know, questioning it, challenging it, saying things like, celibacy, isn't that kind of boring? Isn't that kind of taking things a little bit far? Do you really need to do that? Why would you even want to do that, right? So we as the ego here, we feel a little bit threatened by celibacy. We feel kind of confused by it, kind of judgmental towards it, because from our perspective, we don't really understand the appeal. We don't really understand celibacy. And what's very interesting that I noticed is how from this perspective, we see it as a loss, right? We assume that we're losing something, like we're giving something up and not getting back anything in return. Now, why do we assume this? Well, it's because we don't know anything else. We don't know what's on the other side. And we can only imagine from our current perspective and paradigm, right? Which is, if we're honest, is very sex obsessed. So then we can ask, well, then what changes things? And the answer here is, in my experience, is when these two things happen. So number one, it's when we start to become more conscious. So a raise in consciousness. And number two, it's when we start to suffer more because of our actions, right? So one of the only things that I've found that is powerful enough to make us care about something like celibacy is, in fact, suffering. In particular, it's the real, inner emotional and mental suffering that we have. And this is kind of what began to change my perspective. So what I noticed in myself is that eventually you become so dissatisfied with sex that it starts to leave you feeling a little bit empty. And if you feel inside of yourself here, if you introspect, what you'll notice is that it doesn't really sit with you very well. It makes you feel a little bit frustrated that sex isn't relieving your suffering. Instead, it's kind of worsening it, And because you're feeling this suffering, the universe throws you some intuition, as it always does. And this intuition that you get, and I have no doubt you've had this before, it's a feeling of, maybe I should spend some time away from sex. Maybe I should spend some time on my own, with myself, with my being. And when we have this, it's very visceral for us, right? It's very intuitive, because at this point, there's just one thing that we know for sure, just one thing, and that is that we want to feel peace, and that we don't want to feel this suffering anymore, right? So how do we feel this peace? Well, what we do is we follow our intuition, and we start practicing celibacy. And if you're curious, by the way, why we feel drawn to do it in the first place, is because we actually know deep down that holding on to our energy is very purifying for us, right? We know that it would make us feel more whole. We know that it would restore our spiritual energy. It would make us feel that warmth and that vibrancy again. And this is exactly what happened to me. So I got really excited because I started to explore, this kind of other side of things, and I was really happy to find out that you are, in fact, rewarded by being more responsible with your energy. And doing basically the one thing that is so counterintuitive for us, which is to not have sex at all. Now, the next thing that I saw as I began to practice celibacy, and you'll probably find this too, is that sexual desire, it's still going to be there. You're still gonna have these pretty strong urges or desires. But ultimately, what happens if you stick with it is you are pulled in an even deeper spiritual direction. And this is what you're looking for, right? It's where you feel this overwhelming spiritual duty to just essentially put your own happiness first, right? And so as you do this, as you take more time for yourself, slowly but surely, things, they do begin to click. You start having these realizations and you start gaining this clarity on your life. And the reason this is because when you start distancing yourself from sex, what happens is you get better at objectively evaluating what sex really is and what it's really doing for you, right? And the more you think about it, the more you reflect on it, the more you realize that it's not the ultimate thing. And not only is it not the ultimate thing, if you're sensitive, if you're intuitive, you can actually see that it takes away from your ultimate happiness. It makes it harder to attain because now you're feeling, less stable, less spiritual, less whole. And so what you're left with is this feeling of, if you were to just do one thing and one thing only, it would be to remain pure. And as it turns out, what this means is to keep yourself to yourself, to keep your energy within, and to essentially let that energy purify you and strengthen you and make you feel peaceful and whole. And I'm sure you've seen this in the past. When you don't have sex, even for just like a week, and you do your spiritual practice, you feel vibrant. You feel in touch with yourself. You feel like you're on the right track. And this is the feeling that you have to take seriously. Because over time, you do learn that this is your compass, right? This is your intuitive guide. Listening to my videos is great. But what's even more potent is your own intuition. It's your own inner guru, right? My videos are designed to wake this up out of you. But it's your job to act on it when you feel this higher consciousness. So as this stuff was happening for me, one thing I should let you know that really sealed the deal, and maybe what changed my perspective the most, was experiencing what I call the fruits of celibacy, right? So the positives, the benefits, the stuff that the average person doesn't tend to experience, not because they're a bad person, but simply because they lack experience with celibacy. And so these fruits, they're essentially the higher spiritual rewards of renunciation. And these are things like feeling good, feeling warm, feeling whole, feeling spiritual, feeling like you don't regret anything. And ultimately, it's feeling happier. Because if I were to really just pinpoint what opened me up to celibacy for good, was having this spiritual awakening where I realized that the happiest I am is actually when I'm not having sex at all. And if I really look back, this has been true throughout my whole life, right? It's always been there. And, perhaps the most poignant example of this looking back is realizing that the best moments in a relationship are not when you're having sex, but in the moments right before. So those moments where connection and intimacy are happening, but in a non-physical way. And if you know me, you know that I love to link everything back to enlightenment and awakening, the spiritual stuff. And so what's really going on here, from a higher perspective, is we are enjoying the metaphysical connection. We are enjoying the universe in the other person, right? We value the metaphysical, the emotional, and the spiritual connection infinitely more than we do the physical. And what I feel we're doing here with celibacy is we're just honoring that in a way where we're just staying right there in those moments before, where we're basically in love. But instead of dampening that love with lust and desire, we stay in love. And this love extends to everyone and everything we do. So if you practice celibacy, what you'll probably see is that you gain a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy. So, much more than you used to have, because now you feel full. You feel warm. You actually have energy to give because you're not giving it away through lust and desire. So from this realization, I want you to know that this isn't just about removing suffering. It's actually about becoming a warmer, more spiritual human being who can extend their energy outward and love and serve all of humanity. Right? Ultimately, the goal of this work, it's very, very deep. So to start wrapping up, guys, what I want you to take away from this is not just to start practicing celibacy, Because I appreciate that celibacy is hard. You know, I remember I didn't even think it was possible maybe like 5-6 years ago. And that was also considering that I've always been a very optimistic person, right? Really, this is about keeping yourself open. It's about contemplating this topic for yourself, meditating on it. And if you do want to practice it for real, you can. And of course, if you need some help with that, I do offer coaching, of course. So if you need some guidance, some support, or some help with even just building the foundation with nofap or retention, of course you can check out my website. You can book a call if you're interested. But otherwise, this is about you. This is about you. You know, this is about your own personal and spiritual growth. So do keep yourself open. You never really know how much you're going to change. Always be open to the possibility that you might mature beyond what you think you're capable of. Because it's completely possible, especially if you really want it to happen. So that's it for me, guys. Good luck with this. And if you've enjoyed this one and would like more, then as always, please do subscribe.